it still blows my mind. It boggles my mind that they closed the case with no motive.
Right.
No motive.
Right, with no motive. And you know damn good and well Joe Lombardo knows what the motive is. But again,
Dude
this shows how he
shot
answers.
over 50 people. Dude shot over 50
well,
people.
He answers to the casinos. And based on what I've learned and what we reveal in Vegas Wrong, this guy knows what the motive is. Joe Lombardo. And so, again, him standing up there and saying he doesn't know what the motive is yet another bold-faced lie from a liar.
Yeah, my stomach turned when I saw that.
Stephen Paddock hated the casinos, and he wanted to get revenge on them. And for whatever reason, those casinos don't want him saying that's the motive, possibly because they're worried about copycat crime, or I don't know what the reason is, but that's why. Because Joe Lombardo, even in earlier interviews, he came out and said that basically, you know, the guy had lost some money, Stephen Paddock had lost a lot of money from gambling, and he kind of hinted that could be the motive, but for whatever reason, he's on a rope with them. You know, the casinos who are holding him like the puppet that he is don't want him to formally reveal that as a motive.
Sure.
And we're going to dive into that more in Vegas Wrong.
Because what are you going to do? Like, let the average gambler know that, like, yeah, we're perfectly willing to almost bankrupt somebody. We're perfectly willing to let you come in and dump $100,000, and then we'll give you a $50,000 marker.
Right.
You know, do you really want the general public to know that? And that's how you treat, like, this one slice of people.
The scumbag politicians in that city who answer to the big money don't hold anybody accountable. They're all part of this circle jerk, looking out for each other, and they all get grilled by the casinos to protect the big interests. And one of the things Vegas Wrong will be exposing is that this is one of the reasons why we're not being told the truth in the Vegas mass shooting, is because of scumbag politicians like Steve Wilson, their scumbag mayor Carolyn Goodman, their scumbag governor, and scumbag sheriff who don't care about anything other than protect the big money
and getting back to business as usual.
Yeah, exactly. Get the registers ringing. That's all they care about. They don't care about doing what's right.
Yeah. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, even that.
Yeah. Well, that's what they mass shooting. They tried to, and sadly, it pretty much worked. You know, when they use their influence.
And that's what I was telling Shannon, was that in episode 167 was the fact that, dude, you don't get it. Every stitch of news I have gotten since our first episode about the shooting, and since me having you on in Vegas, has been from you. I don't see it. And I follow news feeds, my friend. I worked in live news and stuff like that. Like, I am a news hound.
Right.
That's what I do.
That's not an accident.
No, exactly.
A lot of people don't know that Vegas has something called the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority.
Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So you know, when you go to Vegas and you pay that resort fee, it's quite a bit of money. It's like anywhere from $25, $45 a night. Okay. You have over 40 million visitors a year in Vegas paying this hefty resort fee. You know where that money goes? It goes to advertise Vegas.
Yeah.
And the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authorities is in charge of, they're the ones who created what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And they're the ones who spend literally hundreds of millions a year advertising, come to Vegas and have a good time. You're going to come to the Bellagio. You're going to win a bunch of, you know, you see these ads and you get the impression that you're just going to roll into the Bellagio, and walk out with $50,000 and 2 hot blondes under your arm. But the reality is you're probably going to walk out broke with your dumpy ass wife.
Yeah. Like,
so Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, they're the ones who spend hundreds of millions a year advertising, like, come to Vegas. And one of the things we're exploring in Vegas Wrong is this organization one of the reasons why we're not getting the truth? Did they use their influence in the media to, you know, if you're spending hundreds of millions a year in advertising, can you go to these stations and say, hey, listen, we spent millions in advertising this year. We'd appreciate it if you'd lay off the Vegas mass shooting story. Now, we're exploring in Vegas Wrong if that happened, and if that's the reason why this story went away. Well, Stephen Paddock was, by all accounts, a really unusual guy to do this. I mean, you know, this guy had been a millionaire, mild-mannered accountant. He people who are close to the family who say that he's the kind of guy who never raised his voice. He was, he wasn't anybody. He'd be the last person in the world that you would suspect would do something like this. And even I was listening to an interview last night from Steve Wynn, because Paddock spent a lot of time in Wynn's casino, and Wynn was saying the same thing, that all his employees said never would have expected this mild-mannered guy who, according to Wynn, never even drank alcohol, would do something like this.
Well, a couple of the interesting facts I found were the fact that he called his mother, and just had a casual conversation. It wasn't like, "Bye, Ma, how you do?" There wasn't any kind of inkling toward anything. And even his brother came out and was like, he is not like politically involved. Like he doesn't toe a party line one way or the other. He's not religiously inclined in any way. Like there. It
appears that the only thing that he was really into was just kind of gambling. Yeah. Now he had been a pilot. People had said like one of his great joys in life was flying, and one of the things I learned while researching him is that when he was no longer able to fly because of health reasons, that kind of drove him into a depression. That's when the gambling started to hit really hard.
I can see that.
But I'm not saying at all that Stephen Paddock was any kind of a great guy. Yeah. Because I don't believe he was.
And he actually was he was a contractor as well. Was it not Northrop Grumman?
I know. He was an accountant. He was
okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I know he somehow had big connections with major military contract, that came out fairly early in investigation.
Yeah, they had rental properties, and so but he was a pretty prosperous individual. He had money, and I mean. I actually we drove to his house in Mesquite, Nevada, and filmed it. It's a really nice place. I mean, it was a nice neighborhood. There's a golf course on the neighborhood, and as soon as we turned the camera on, one of his neighbors just stomped out and got in our face and said, we have a right to privacy, and I'm gonna call up the police.
Get out of my camera shot.
And I kind of said, oh, okay, yeah, call the police and tell them to come arrest somebody who's not breaking any law, because obviously we weren't on anybody's property. Sure. You can film from a public street.
Absolutely, you can.
That's the thing is, people who aren't terribly bright think they can just say to you, "Oh, I'm going to call the police," and that you'll run away. But so I filmed Paddock's house, and my point is just it was a really nice house on a golf course, and I mean, geez, it didn't. That's not something you see a lot with these mass shooters.
Yeah, it wasn't a ramshackle shack. It wasn't like a Unabomber shack, something like that. It wasn't a place that looked like a bunker. It's not like a 2-bedroom apartment where one of them has an electronics workbench full of detonation equipment.
I fly through the window because the golf course is literally right behind his house. I mean, and so that's something you haven't really seen before, is somebody this prosperous doing something like this. But so Vegas Wrong really delves into Paddock and why he did this, or if he did it, and the movie's as much about why we're not getting the truth as what the truth is, and why we're not getting it is because basically everybody in Vegas only cares about money. They don't care about doing what's right. They don't care about the truth. They care about money. And they understand that this story is getting in the way of the registers ringing, and that's why they did everything they can to make the story go away. And Vegas Wrong is going to expose.
That's why they've held back the Survivors Fund, all that stuff. Like there's money that people like Shannon and stuff like that who were injured. The families of the dead, things like that are supposed to get their settlement, supposed to get the money for their injuries, things like that, and totally been held back.
Shoot. Yeah, when we were doing the last shoot for Vegas Wrong, I checked in with some of the survivors, and they were just now getting their funds. There's one woman I interviewed who was she did hair for a living, and so she injured her hand, and she couldn't do hair for months. Yeah. And it was, this happened in October. It was August before I think they have something called the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center.
Yeah.
And he went there, and she was like filling out paperwork in August to get reimbursed for like lost funds or whatever. But so what happened with this is basically the scumbag politicians of Vegas never miss a chance for a photo op, particularly a national photo op. Yeah. And so when the whole eyes of the world were on Vegas, you had Steve Sisolak, who's running for governor, very publicly starting, rallying behind this Vegas Strong Fund. And I actually showed up and filmed some things, and he was there just glad handing everybody and Vegas Strong this and that. And as soon as the cameras were off, he was like out of there. You know, just zoom like a road runner. Just
I gotta go.
You have to ask yourself, like, was Vegas Strong? And that's why we call the movie Vegas Wrong. Was it really about helping the victims who, many of have never even gotten that Vegas Strong money? Or was it about helping themselves? Was it about people like Steve Sisolak helping themselves? And I think it was. I think he, and this guy, Steve Sisolak, this guy's a city councilman running for governor. And you look in a lot of the press conferences and you see him, he's the silver-haired guy in the back. And you ask yourself, what the hell is this guy doing here? Well, what he's doing there is getting himself national FaceTime so he can be the next governor, and very publicly supporting Vegas Strong. But he doesn't appear to care too much about the money actually getting to the victims, because I've interviewed a lot of them who haven't seen any. And they're, so it's just a scumbag parade in this town when you're talking about Vegas politicians. So we're going to be talking about that, like where the money really went, and was this, in the film explores. And see, the interesting thing about Steve Sisolak was actually 3 or 4 years ago, he was the biggest opponent of the police department. This was a guy who called out the sheriff, Doug Gillespie, that was before Lombardo got in office, for like colluding with the union. He basically called him out to the point where the sheriff, Doug Gillespie, like went out in front of the LVMPD headquarters. You might even remember this from what happened in Vegas. We have that scene, and he says, "I'm offended," So he was talking about Steve Sisolak. So, 4 or 5 years ago, Steve Sisolak was like the biggest enemy of the police department. And now he's like glad handing Lombardo and kissing ass and making sure that his face is on national television and supposedly being the ambassador of Vegas Strong, when it appears that all it's really about is him getting FaceTime and trying to help himself get elected governor. So, in my opinion, that's what Steve Sisolak's really about. And we're going to be exposing that in Vegas Wrong, too. If you want to be a scumbag, the problem with that is sometimes somebody might come along and expose you for it. I've spent the last week looking at literally all of the body cam footage from that night, because we're incorporating it into the film Vegas Wrong. What I saw, I just want to make myself clear, like, there were a lot of LVMPD officers who were doing everything they could to help that night. And there were good officers who did help, and they were just kind of figuring it out. And a lot of them I don't think can really be faulted for that. They were on the ground and they're trying to figure it out. But the question is really why it took so long to get, 70 minutes to get the officers up to the room, And it appears that there was a huge communication breakdown that night, and that appears to be one of the things they're trying to hide. And will be, and to be honest with you, I have some information about that that is really, really damning. And we're going to be including that in Vegas Wrong, but I have to verify it further. I actually just recently learned it a couple days ago. As long as any hitmen don't show up at my door, you'll be able to So that's something that's like breaking right now. Here in September, we're actually incorporating some new information into the film right now about why there was a communication breakdown that night. And it also appears to be the real reason that the LVMPD is covering this up, because it's bad. And it's a pattern of corruption, and something that it appears that they've made a habit of doing. So it took news organizations suing them for least damage. And, having spent the last week going through that footage, I'll tell you there's a lot of questionable things in it. And there's sections of it where there's no sound, and then the sound comes back on again. And there's also multiple things where officers are instructed to turn their video cameras off. You know, there's this one where they're by I think it's the Southwest Area Command. It isn't too far from Mandalay Bay, and there's like a strike team getting ready to go, and this woman's marching around saying cameras off, cameras off, cameras off, and everyone's saying yeah, but apparently one person didn't remember to turn their camera off, so that's why we have that footage. But there's also things where, you know, one of the guys doing the breach just goes, "I'm going to turn this camera off now." You know, like he says that, and then then the footage just goes off. So it's clear they're hiding something, and you know, I mean, I was, to be honest with you, when I was going through this footage, I was just like, how did they let this get to me? You know, because here's the crazy part. Like, so when the judge, the court actually called them on their BS. The court basically said, listen, you guys are stalling. Just release the footage. Like, we're not buying this crap. Release the footage.
Yeah.
Joe Lombardo, and what a lot of people don't understand what was going on is Joe Lombardo had an election coming up in June. So he was stalling this controversial footage to make sure that the stuff that made him look bad, made his officers look bad, didn't come out until after he was reelected. And then once he's reelected, all this video, all this stuff comes out, like where you even have one of the LVMPD officers saying that he thinks there's a multiple shooter. You have officers like being cowards in the hallways when they could have stopped Paddock, all this stuff. But a lot of it's kind of flown under the radar because the tremendous power that Vegas has with the media and their ability to shut stories down. And that's what we're exploring in Vegas Wrong. And actually my last documentary, What Happened in Vegas, went into it as well, but not to the extent that this is. You know, I've talked to people who lived in Vegas their whole life, like 70-year-old guys. And they told me that in the old days, you'd walk in and the people knew your name.
Yep.
There was a warmth and, you know, and they knew how to take care of you. And that's one thing you don't really see with the corporate Vegas is it's just a very cold, it's all about mathematical formulas and $45 resort fees and $11 beers. And I mean, let's be real. Like the place kind of sucks now.
It's definitely the tourist trap now.
The idea of like the guy who rolls into Vegas and thinks that he's going to like win a bunch of money, like didn't used to make me laugh out loud, but it makes me laugh out loud now. MGM Resorts, I think, is particularly sociopathic. I mean, the ones who sued the victims of the mass shooting.
Yeah.
And I mean,
let's talk about that for a second. Why it was interesting when they did that. Go into that some.
Okay, well, interestingly, and we have this in Vegas Wrong. There was an attorney who was there that night, and she was one of the people who got injured. And so I talked with her extensively. She lives in San Diego, to kind of help me understand why they did that. Really bright lady, and she told me that, you know, it basically comes down to it helps minimize their losses, and they're not actually suing for any financial amount, but it takes it. And so they're basically doing it.
It's really like a preemptive measure to say, hey, man, that's some dude that stayed at our hotel. It's not our fault.
Right. But it's basically, as with most things, it's about themselves and helping themselves and minimizing their liability. But it's just, I mean, it certainly doesn't look good. Yeah. You know, you certainly lose the popular vote when you go after people who got shot.
And they were definitely one of many properties along the Strip that donated the absolute maximum of $30,000 to the good sheriff's reelection campaign.
Oh, well, see, the other thing you need to understand about that is, you know, in Vegas, the town where everybody butters each other's bread, like when they support a sheriff, when MGM Internet, like they give the campaign maximum, but then they call up their liquor vendor and that person gives the maximum. And then they call up their people who run their housekeeping services as maximum. And then they call up the food vendor and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And before you know, those 15 or 16 companies associated with MGM, MGM International Resorts, that's the biggest employer in the state of Nevada, the number one, thousands of employees. And so that's how it happens, you know, like it's not just the MGM International gives them that money, it's all the vendors that work with them. And so it's just and so one of the questions we ask in Vegas Wrong, and we even went into it in my last documentary, What Happened in Vegas, is is Joe Lombardo lying to minimize their legal liability?
I think there is no. I'm of the mind that there is no question about that. No question.
I think you're right. But the question is, one thing you wonder is when Joe Lombardo signed up to be a cop, do you think he imagined going down this slippery slope?
I don't
where
think
he would
so.
ultimately be screwing
really
people over and searching the big money? Or does someone like that get into it for the right reasons and then they kind of slowly sidetracked into being corrupt?
The Mandalay Bay shooting had a lot to do with that. It was, like you were saying earlier, the fact that it may have very well been the fact that this millionaire was just losing a lot of money to casinos and just what the hell.
Well, he went from being a billionaire to not a millionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
Anymore. And I'm pretty sure in the report I read, I believe he went from having well over $1 million and I believe almost 2 million or slightly over 2 million. It's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
To like all the way down to like, I think around 530,000.
Yeah.
So it sounds like things were going well for Paddock for a while and then they weren't, and that he got angry and took revenge. And for some reason, Vegas
got depressed
Joe
and
Lombardo,
snapped.
Yeah. Yeah. And Puppet Boy Joe Lombardo, and the people who run Vegas don't want you to know that, but that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, because kudos to my former bassist and listener of the show, follower of the Dudes and Beer Facebook page, Michael Zappla. He has held that the entire time. He's like, this dude was in debt to casinos, man. Like he ruined his life friggin' gambling. He's depressed. Like he just snapped. He just snapped under the pressure of debt.
I want to make it really clear. Like,
no.
As far as I'm concerned, Stephen Paddock doing what he did is just unfathomable.
Monster.
Like, I just can't. I can't conceive of wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But they're trying to hide the reason that he even did it.
Exactly.
And that I object to. Now, nobody's saying that this guy was anything other than a monster, but so are you guys.
Yeah.
So are you guys.
I was a part. I was a cog in the machine, man. I came and served you your drinks. I made sure that you got a double.
Yeah.
And that's just it. The day that I saw that, I was like, oh man, I can't.
Right. Yeah.
Vegas Wrong. Whenever it comes out, where they can go to
find our Facebook page on. If they look up Vegas Wrong on Facebook, that's where they can find our movie. Follow us for updates, and then if they want to check out my last film, What Happened in Vegas, that's available on Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo, and other places as well.